the Radical Secular Podcast, a demand for justice, equality, and rational public policy. Subscribe at YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and all the major podcast channels. Visit our website at theradicalsecular.com for articles, transcripts, and our complete library of episodes. Support us on Patreon, and follow us on social media.
Hello and welcome back to the Radical Secular Podcast. My name is Christophe Defoe.
I'm Sean Prophet.
I'm Drew Scott.
Today we'll define the term wage slave for you, and we'll discuss whether corporate power can or should be brought to bear on vaccine-hesitant Americans. And before that, we'll revisit the horror show that was the January 6th insurrection. But before we do any of that, I want to remind you that if you like our show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, check out our Patreon, and tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels. And we also publish new articles regularly at the Journal on radicalsecular.com. Okay, let's get into the t-shirts. Drew, let's start with you.
I've just got a fun one this week. It's a Jaws and Star Wars mashup. It just says Jawas in the Jaws font with a bunch of the little Jawas swimming up to presumably grab an unsuspecting swimmer there. I love the
Hootini!
Yeah, we all love him.
We all love it. That's great. That's great. Sean, what about you, man?
Okay, well, today I am rocking an Extinction Rebellion t-shirt.
Oh, nice. Yes.
And the reason I wore this today is not because our show is particularly to do with climate, but I mean, actually, every show has to do with climate because climate has now become something that is going to be a part of all of our lives for the rest of our lives. And I was looking this morning, just reading the news and stuff, and there are all kinds of ranchers who are having to sell their cattle, and even goat farmers, dairies, like this lady who makes goat yogurt. She was having a lot of problems in her life and finally found something that she could do and was turning a profit and was becoming very popular, making this kind of bespoke natural goat yogurt. And she has to sell her goats now because there's no water where she is and she can't water them or feed them. So it's having a devastating impact on everyone, and it's something, Greenland, some ungodly amount of ice melted like yesterday. Like the I don't even know what the figure is. It was like billions of tons of ice melted in one day.
Holy shit.
Unbelievable. So I'm just trying to keep the climate crisis on the forefront of everyone's mind. It's not like we really are going to need a lot of reminders because this is becoming our life at this point. So, but it's really, we got to get our shit together.
Yeah, for sure. It's really remarkable how, like you said, it's going to be part of our lives. In a sense, the climate has obviously always been part of our lives, but it's been something that's faded into the background. Right now, it is like an existential, right, it is an exigency, right? But there's an emergency now, and every day we feel it, even if it's just like wild swings in temperature here in the Northeast, or what's going on in the South and the Southwest, which is just, insane what's happening there. The world is on fire, as I keep saying. The world is on fucking fire,
Yeah, and the fact is that it's just like COVID, right? We could be right in the middle of an pandemic, and people are still denying it. And it's the same thing with climate. There are people who are still saying that, it's been debunked. That's not true. It's like, well, how do you explain what's going on right in front of your nose?
Right in front of your nose. Oh, it's remarkable.
Needs more study, guys.
Yeah, needs more study. Exactly. Another one from the Heritage Foundation or whatever the fuck, right?
Yeah.
All right. So my
Let's get
t-shirt.
Exxon on the case.
yeah, exactly. I'm sure we'll get right to the bottom of that. So I'm wearing my Vulcan Idic shirt today.
We love that.
Yes. Nice. So that is the symbol of the Vulcans. It stands for the concept of infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And I'm wearing that. I'm wearing the shirt for two reasons. First of all, because the IDIC is one of the things that we're going to be talking about in a minute is how we are diversifying this show and adding Drew and adding new perspectives and different ways of talking about these issues. And I think that's important. but also because I happen to have just finished watching Enterprise. So the Star Trek Enterprise. So if anybody who pays attention to this show knows that I have been on basically like over the course of the last year or so, rewatching every single episode of Star Trek, some of which I hadn't watched since I was, since the 90s, and so I finally finished yesterday, or the day before yesterday, I finally finished Enterprise, my entire like sort of thing, like, revolution around. And at the end of that episode season, when I'm not going to give away, I guess whatever, the show's like 20 years old. I don't want to make spoilers for Star Trek.
This wasn't last Sunday, It's not the newest HBO series or whatever.
Exactly.
Old series.
But Trip Tucker and T'Pol lose their kid at the end, and so she's holding the Idic in her hand through most of those two episodes. She's holding this Idic over her baby, and so that is why I decided to wear it today. It's sort of a sad end to my Star Trek, trip. But this means I have to start over again.
Yeah, well, I did that same trip in 2015, 2016, did all of them in order, and that helped keep me sane through all of the craziness.
I'll bet.
For sure. And the very last season of Enterprise was extremely topical. It had that whole story arc with the Terra Prime episode and all of that. And it just couldn't be more spot on. Like, did these guys have a crystal ball or what?
I know. And what's really remarkable too, I mean, it's really a shame because the first two seasons of that show are not very good. But once you get into the fourth season, is really good. Like, that is as good as any Star Trek out there. I put it up against almost any other Star Trek. It is solid stuff. The themes are good. And so it's a real shame that they didn't, like, once they finally hit their stride, then they get canceled. Right. It also suffers from like the problem in that era, which was overuse of CGI. Right. So you're basically like watching a cartoon kind of, like the Star Treks. You remember the Star Wars, the first three.
Yes, right around that same time, the Phantom Menace and all that. Yeah.
And it's like you were just watching a cartoon half the time, right? Like, they didn't know how to like use practical effects and CGI together in the same way they're able to do now. So
yeah, well, I mean, the first two seasons of all the Star Trek series are kind of rough. It took them all a good 2 seasons to find their footing. Really, if you look at some of the episodes in Deep Space Nine, which to me is the best Star Trek that's ever been done,
I think so.
The first 2 seasons of that show have some pretty rough episodes. Take a look at Move Along Home.
That's
a pretty funny one.
Yeah, it's a funny one, but it's kind of like, what the
fuck? Yeah. Totally right. That's why it's such a shame that they didn't have, like, because like, see, by season 4, those shows are usually really kicking. You know what I mean? Yes. And they've got and also you have gotten to know the characters, so you're like personally invested in it at that point. By the end, you're like, oh, T'Pol, my friend. I'm gonna lose. Captain Archer, you're just you paragon of sacrifice and commitment. You know what I mean?
What was his dog's name? The dog was
Porthos.
That's right.
Yeah. And at first I thought that whole concept was corny, but then by the end I'm like, oh, Porthos and his cheese.
I know. Well, the one thing I liked about Enterprise is that it was in high def, and there has been a reissue of Next Gen in high def, but not Deep Space Nine, and that is a damn shame.
That is a damn shame. Deep Space Nine is such a good series. I mean, like you said, I mean, for me, it's either that or Next Gen is the best. But I think ultimately, if you put a gun to my head, I think I would have to go with Deep Space Nine. I think, just in terms of the story writing and the story arcs that they do, like the Dominion War arc. What?
Yeah, that's the best of Star Trek to me.
It's some of the best Star Trek out there.
Yeah, fortunately, they did a documentary that was, I think, crowdfunded about Deep Space Nine. Oh man, I'm blanking on the name of it now, but it's really, really excellent. And they crowdfunded it, and one of the stretch goals they had for the campaign was to actually remaster one of the space battle scenes in Deep Space Nine, because, like you said, it never got a true remaster. So that's worth checking out as well.
For sure. Well,
yeah.
Well, we're going to begin our show today by discussing with you some of the, well, we started our show talking about Star Trek, but now we're going to continue talking about our show, talking about some of the structural changes that we've undertaken here at the Radical Secular Podcast. First of all, we've added longtime friend of the show, Drew Scott, to our host lineup, but you know that already if you tuned in last week for Drew's debut appearance as a host. What's less obvious, perhaps, is that the addition of Drew signals our intention to add a diversity of perspectives and styles to our programs, because infinite diversity and infinite combinations. As Drew begins hosting his own shows, he'll lead us through Geek Out Fest, in which we'll connect with elements of pop culture and music and connect them with themes that we discuss so frequently on this show. And as a practical matter, Drew's addition will add manpower to our operation, right? So dispersal of hosting responsibilities over more people will allow each of us to spend a greater portion of our time creating meaningful content on the internet, videos. We have a lot of ideas, and reaching more people and hopefully interacting more closely with our trusted current listeners. We're always a work in progress here at the Radical Secular, and that's because we're always striving to improve. So do you guys want to comment on any or all of that? Drew, I'll give you the first word.
Yeah, I'm happy to be part of the team. And, I think it's become increasingly difficult to separate, our entertainment, our pop culture from politics, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we're hearing a lot from the right about cancel culture and, people being upset for being canceled for doing or saying despicable things. Now, of course, it's case by case, right? But, I think of the Gina Carano thing, which happened recently. For those who don't know, she was the star of, or one of the stars of the Mandalorian series on Disney Plus. And she had a long history of saying and, posting pretty despicable things. She's a transphobe. She's defended the January 6th insurrectionists. She's an anti-masker. She sucks.
She totally sucks, and it's a shame because she's a good actor, and I liked her character. So I have no idea why in the hell she had to go and do that.
Yeah, she was warned too. Like, it wasn't like one thing that she did. I think she changed her Twitter bio because Disney asked the actors to put their pronouns in their Twitter bio, I think, and she put beep bop boop as like a reference to R2D2 or something, just to be an asshole, stuff like that. And her co-star, her coworker, Pedro Pascal, has, I believe, said that they have a trans member of their family. So it's like you're poking the bear, and it's particularly stupid because she had a spinoff in the works. They were working on a spinoff series for her. So, and that was a little while ago, but even just this past week, we saw the release on Netflix of the new Masters of the Universe series, which is a He-Man series for those of you, younger than, 30. But it was a very popular cartoon and children's toy line back in the 80s. And Kevin Smith, who I generally like very much, even if I'm not into every single movie that he produces, I'm a big fan of him as like a human being. And I wish him the best in whatever he's doing. But he is behind this reboot of Masters of the Universe. Now, they didn't market it as He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. It was always Masters of the Universe. Yes, He-Man is at the forefront of it, but and I've only seen the first episode. I haven't watched the whole thing, but He-Man takes kind of a back seat through the rest of the season, and one of the female characters, Teela, becomes kind of the main focal point. So how do you think the toxic neckbeards on the internet are taking to that? Not very well. Not very well at all. And, Kevin Smith, he's a sensitive guy. I remember back when Stan Lee passed away and the Captain Marvel movie was coming out. Kevin Smith, directed this movie Mallrats in the 1990s, and it's awesome, classic. And Stan Lee has a little cameo in it, right? So I guess secretly the Marvel team filmed one of Stan Lee's little MCU cameos of him reading the script for Mallrats in the background of the Captain Marvel movie, which is set in the 90s. So it's like they're keeping that continuity going, you know?
That's cool. That's cool.
And,
Very cool.
Kevin Smith had no idea they were doing that. And so when he went into the theater and saw that, he wept, you know, he was like blown away. It just meant like so much to him. And he was very open and public about it. And he's very public and open about his emotions in general. And of course, there's all sorts of like gifs and memes and bullshit mocking this guy because he had the audacity to put a female at the forefront of this Masters of the Universe show, which is clearly supposed to be, you know, a story of the broader universe and not just a He-Man story, right? Like there's a lot of characters and it's a really absurd franchise. I mean, there's like a skunk man and like all kinds of weird stuff. They call it the kitchen sink property because there's like robots and all kinds of weird crap in it, right? But it's great. And yeah, people are losing their shit about it, and it translates into all these fandoms. We saw it in Star Wars with the treatment of Kelly Marie Tran, where she was bullied and harassed to the point where she, you know, left social media because she was a woman in a Star Trek or Star Wars movie that people didn't like or whatever. It's like, that's not okay. Like if you didn't like the movie, fine, you know, fine. That's cool. I don't like every single movie that comes out. Like, it's not for you. Cool. But I do find it interesting how these things sort of get a renaissance, right? Like it happened with Star Trek with, you know, when the next gen came out, people were like, you know, that's not, you know, my crew. That's not my captain. Who's this British guy?
Real Star Trek.
Yeah. That's not the real Star Trek, the gatekeeping kind of stuff. And it's the same with the Star Wars thing. But right now we're seeing kind of a renaissance, a resurgence of popularity in the prequels. You know, because the kids who grew up watching the prequels are now adults.
So it's nostalgia for them.
It's nostalgia for them. They have the memories.
I feel like my brother's in that category. My brother Justinian, he's just about 30 now. And so he grew up watching those. And so like it's wild to think that was such a, you know, formative. That was what he thinks of Star Wars, right? Initially, right? Not the ones that we all saw and thought of as Star Wars, but
yeah, the ones we all saw are like, that's the old Star Wars.
That's the old stuff. Some movie from back in the day. But I do want to move on. But Drew, it sounds to me that like this is exactly the kind of content we're talking about, folks, right? Like we're going to be able to really connect with the stuff that you watch every day on your streaming channels, you know, the stuff that your kids are watching, the stuff that your friends are watching, whatever. And we're going to be able to connect those things and make them sort of relevant and pick out those themes like Drew was just talking about, right? You were talking about these themes of the gatekeeper sort of concept and all these things. And I think that all that I think is really relevant and in terms of what we talk about on this show. And of course, Drew, you're just a funny guy and fun to hang out with. And, you know, there's also just that. So you're a cool dude.
Thank you. Well, I mean, just one last thing is that I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the right has strayed away from the moral compass of the basic values of human rights, right? Like the values of Star Wars and Marvel and all of these popular franchises that are dominating our culture right now and that people are saying are like being feminized or taken over by the woke libtards or whatever, they haven't really changed, right? Like Marvel's always been about diversity. Star Wars has always been, you know, the story of a leftist rebellion fighting against a far right authoritarian government. Star Trek has always been a vision of a leftist progressive utopia, right? Like I could go on. Like it's not that we changed, it's that they changed.
Great point. And Sean, you want to chime in?
I have a couple of things here as you were talking, Drew. I was just thinking about, and I was reading recently about how much meme culture elected Donald Trump and how this whole thing, this whole building, especially of young people, because you know, millennials and Gen X are progressively more liberal, right? And as we talked to Jonathan Zucker about this, I mean, it's like plus 16 are voting Democratic, right? But there is still a lot of young men who are very caught up into this whole anti-wokeness thing, and their meme culture on 4chan and 8chan and all of this definitely moved right into the mainstream culture. And so I think it's important for us to keep our finger on the pulse, which is why I'm personally really glad that you're doing this, because I don't follow that stuff and I don't take any of it seriously. And it's like the first time I saw Pepe the Frog meme, I had no idea what that was and how insidious it was. And then of course, then we all found out after Trump won the election, but this was circulating, Gamergate. Steve Bannon was actually involved with video games. I mean, this is something that was engineered. So we do have to keep our eye on it. And I just want to say also, because it's not just Gina Carano. It's not just any particular individual. They can't help themselves. They literally can't help themselves, because if she had a sane bone in her body, she would have just, bit her tongue and played the role. It's like, you're an actor. You're not being paid for your political views, and you don't have to get on Twitter and spread poison if it's going to kill your career and hurt people. Like, why it's like suicidal. And the same thing, Adam Carolla is now the latest one to become a right-wing cause celeb for being supposedly blacklisted. This was on Fox. And, I always want to say, look, the market has spoken, right? If somebody doesn't want to hire you, if you believe in the free market, you can't argue with that, right?
Yeah, that's markets, right? That's fucking markets, man. And you know what, Sean, I think that's really, really important. What you're saying there is, this, people like her and on the right. And this is a really actually fantastic segue, because it is an inability to control impulse, right? It's like it's an entitlement that I get to say whatever I want, right? I am X, Y, and Z, and not because she's a famous actor, but just because she's a white woman. She's a woman, right? She's a white person, and she's like, I get to say whatever I want, whenever I say it, and any kind of restraint on that. And I think that's kind of a theme that we're going to be talking about a lot through this, because we're going to talk about vaccines, right? We're going to talk about the people who are dying just because they're like, nope, I just don't want to do it, So I think that's actually a really, really great segue, Sean. And so what I want to talk about next is the January 6th hearings and white rage in general, and we'll have a conversation about that. And now, we don't need to be reminded of why we do what we do here at the Radical Secular, but we did get a reminder this week anyway, in the form of hearings related to the January 6th insurrection. They began at the House of Representatives this week. I'm confident that our audience is well informed, so I won't rehash everything that happened during those hearings, but I do want to focus on the gripping testimony given by Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn. I'll read now from the transcript of Dunn's testimony, and please note that unless you are a hardcore MAGA racist, the language is extremely disturbing. Quote, more and more insurrectionists were pouring into the area by the speaker's lobby near the rotunda, and some wearing MAGA hats and shirts that said Trump 2020. I told them just to leave the Capitol, and in response, they yelled, "No, man, this is our house. Trump invited us here. We're here to stop the steal. Joe Biden is not the president. Nobody voted for Joe Biden." I'm a law enforcement officer, and I do my best to keep politics out of my job, but in this circumstance, I responded, well, I voted for Joe Biden. Does my vote not count? Am I nobody? That prompted a torrent of racial epithets. One woman in a pink MAGA shirt yelled, "You hear that, guys? This nigger voted for Joe Biden." Then the crowd, perhaps around 20 people, joined in screaming, "Boo, fucking nigger." No one had ever called me a nigger while wearing the uniform of a Capitol Police officer. In the days following the attempted insurrection, other Black officers shared with me their own stories of racial abuse on January 6th. One officer told me that he had never in his entire 40 years of life been called a nigger to his face, and that streak ended on January 6th. Yet another Black officer later told me that he had been confronted by insurrectionists in the Capitol building who told him, quote, "Put down your gun and we'll show you what kind of nigger you really are," end quote. Now, at this juncture, I want to remind everyone out there that the fact that I said the N-word in this context is not license for you to go and say the N-word, like ever, but certainly not in this context, unless you're Black. I know that should be obvious, but in my experience, many white people, white dudes, that's read white dudes drunk at bars, will jump at the chance to say the N-word out loud, and saying in the context of a quote is a perennial favorite. Okay, so now with that disclaimer out of the way, guys, what connects Officer Dunn's experience and testimony to the historical incidents like the Tulsa Race Massacre and other sort of incidents like that? Anybody want to jump on that?
Well, I just want to say, first of all, like the idea, I don't think that there was ever a time in my life when I thought that was a good word to use, but I would rather just, punch myself in the face than ever use that word. I don't even write it. I never use it. I don't want any association with it. It is so painful and uncomfortable to me. Not just because I know that it's hurtful, but because of everything that it's connected to that is still going on. It is a reminder. It's like having a rock in your shoe or something that you can't get out, and you're hiking for 10 miles. You can't get this thing out, and I don't know. I wish that word didn't exist. And on the other hand, I think it is good when white people say it because it tells you who they really are. There is no better litmus test of racism than that. I mean, the fact that somebody would just casually drop that, even when you're drunk, and people who use being drunk as an excuse for bad behavior, bullshit. It is such bullshit, because being drunk actually removes your inhibitions. It shows who you really are. This is more of who you are, not less, when you're drunk. So, right, exactly. When a drunk guys at the bar are using that, it's because that is who they are, and they may check themselves at other points in their life. But, so connecting this to the Tulsa Race Massacre, of course, there's a double standard. Of course there is. And this nonsense, just the way that, particularly Michael Fanone, okay, you didn't mention him, but he was great. And he's the one, he pounded the table. This guy was literally almost killed. And somehow some people in that crowd, I guess, if he'd been black, he'd probably be dead. And somebody in that crowd had enough humanity to help him out and get him out of there, because he blacked out. I mean, he couldn't even defend himself. But after his testimony, he went on CNN and he's being interviewed about it. And they played a voicemail that he received where a Trump supporter was calling him two other words that I don't really ever like to say. One that starts with a P, that's a synonym for somebody who's supposedly effeminate, and another one that starts with an F, which is his sexuality. Okay. So anyway, this person felt that it was okay to talk that way to a national hero. And this tells you right now, because these same people back cops unconditionally under other circumstances. As long as blue is beating the shit out of black, they back the blue. But as soon as blue is checking white power, now you're going to call them the P word and the F word.
Yep. Just like that.
Just like that. So that's, the Tulsa Race Massacre, again, these things are denied, right? I have had recent conversations with people about the Tulsa Race Massacre. It's like, oh, no, it was a riot. It was overblown. There weren't that many people killed. They started it. This rhetoric, basically, you just take your position as a racist and then you modify history to fit what you want to believe. There is no respect for facts, no respect for what actually occurred, and the fact that the Tulsa Race Massacre was one of hundreds of race massacres that occurred in dozens of cities over many, many decades.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Sean. And I think that is I think it's important to note that the Tulsa Race Massacre, like you say, that is just a particularly memorable version of this thing. And this happened on small scales all the time. That's all the time. That was life in the South for a Black family during certain eras of history. And what I wanted to mention here, and from my mind, and then I'll let you jump in on this too, Drew, and that is, what I see here, and I mentioned it earlier, is that there is this entitlement to not have to restrain oneself, right? There's an entitlement that, first of all, I get to do whatever I want. I get to say whatever I want. And consequences be damned. And like you said, right, the double standard, right? The police work for me and when they're beating up Black people, but they are my enemy when they are restraining me. I think that that what really connects this to the Tulsa issue is like that white rage, right? And you can see it on their faces, right? Mm-hmm. It is blind rage. It is, and a part of this is just what happens when people get together in a group and get frothed up. But when you throw into that the white supremacy element of this, which is clearly what this is, it is really astonishing. It is like the worst of humanity, and it's so important that's why these January 6th hearings are so fucking important, Sean and Drew, because if we don't do this, if this doesn't get memorialized, right, even if we memorialize this, the right will twist it no matter what. So we have to write it down. We have to write it down. We have to see the testimony. And I'm so glad that they're doing this. And I'm so glad those police officers are there, speaking their truth. And they're dealing with PTSD, and they're up there and they're talking to a bunch of people who are literally trying to tell them that what happened to them didn't happen to them. Right? I just can't imagine. I can't imagine, because I know what it's like to be Black and have shitty things happen and then have a white person tell me that it wasn't so bad. Right? How do you know it wasn't so bad? Anyway, Drew, we wanted you to comment?
Yeah, I agree with everything that both you guys are saying. Obviously, that man's experience, that quote you read, is horrifying, and you can feel the fear in his words. Like,
yes,
you can feel it just hearing that. But I just wanted to say that I don't even think you need to go back as far as the Tulsa Race Massacre. You can just look back as far as close as last year at all the protests that we saw nationwide after George Floyd, and how those people were treated, versus how those domestic terrorist, y'all Qaeda motherfuckers were, who stormed the Capitol, right? And even Joe Biden acknowledged this. He was president-elect at the time, but he acknowledged it. And he said that if they were Black Lives Matter protesters, quote, they would have been treated, quote, very differently than the mob of thugs that stormed the Capitol. And then when he was asked about it the next day, he doubled down and said, quote, "We all know that is true, and it is totally unacceptable." And you know what? He's fucking right.
He really is. And I think I'm so glad you brought that up, Drew, because it's like, it's one of those emperor has no clothes sort of situation where it's like, everybody fucking knows this, right? But everybody knows that this is the reality. We all feel it inside of us. We all see it. But to have the president of the United States, the president-elect at the time, like you said, say, no, let's be fucking serious. The emperor really has no fucking clothes. Right? Let's just say that.
Yeah, and there's one other thing I wanted to jump in and say real quick here, and that is that when you listen to Republicans talk, they give away the game every single time. And when they are talking about January 6th, they never talk about the things that occurred there. The first thing they do is talk about, well, what about those Black people burning buildings?
Always.
So it's the whataboutism has been institutionalized by Fox. Never answer the question, always pivot, always attack.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Really, really great point. One thing I wanted to mention earlier, but I'm now thinking about it, and that is Simone, what's her face from the Olympics, and she dropped out of the Olympics because she was for mental, she's like, it's just too much for me, right? Overwhelmed. I mean. And I've read some of her statements. And it's like, yeah, you're going to be twisted. Like the amount of mental and physical control and focus that it takes to pull off those wildly dangerous sort of activities is like, you don't want to be off. You don't want to be off. You break your neck possibly if you're off, right? But I bring this up because getting back to this idea of white rage. Now you have all these guys, right, coming out, and it's amazing how far people will go to disparage a Black woman, right? Like if they can find a Sha'Carri Richardson as well, had the same thing. It's just like this vitriol that comes out, right? Like, and my favorite is stuff when you hear stuff like, oh, she should be so grateful that for everything this country gave her. That is a one that is thrown, especially at Black athletes a lot who try and protest or whatever. And she's not even protesting. She's not doing anything. All she's doing is like, I just don't want to do this.
Yeah, it's the whole love it or leave it crap, right? And I just want to say Simone Biles is a fucking goddess, okay? She is a goddess. She is a hero. She's got, all these medals already. And there was a great cartoon, and it shows this guy, and he's like slumped down in his chair like this, and he's at his computer, and he weighs like 300 pounds, and he's got food all over him and everything else like that. And he's like going, Simone Biles is a disgrace for not doing her, So it was just, it's awesome because these people aren't fit to shine her shoes.
Exactly. She is the GOAT, right? And she has nothing to prove to anybody. And look, I mean, if she couldn't do it can you think about add all the COVID stuff? And I mean, just so many layers of difficulty for these athletes. And look, I mean, if she doesn't feel like she has to do it, but again, Black women, the vitriol that gets spit at Black women, especially Black athletes, right? It's Serena Williams, right? The vitriol.
I was going to say, I mean, and can you imagine anybody treating Michael Jordan that way? Or
exactly.
Or I mean,
Michael Phelps.
Yeah, Michael Phelps, right? So it's racist and sexist. The sexism is almost as big of a deal as the racism here. When you're a Black woman, you're getting both barrels.
Agreed. It's for real. It's for real. Okay. Well, we're going to talk now about the mass late pandemic return to the office that's been unfolding across the United States in recent months, as well as the prospect of private sector vaccine mandates. To set the stage of this discussion, I want to define a term that gets thrown around a lot, especially by Marxists and socialists, and it's the term wage slavery or wage slave. According to Merriam-Webster, wage slavery is a term used to describe a situation where a person's livelihood depends on wages or a salary, especially when the dependence is total and immediate. It seems like a pretty basic definition. In your view, gentlemen, is wage slavery inevitable under a capitalist system? And Sean, I'll give you the first word here.
Well, okay, I'm probably going to botch this joke, but there's an old joke about sex work, and it goes something along the lines of. The punchline is, well, we've already established that you're a sex worker. Now we're just arguing about the price, right? So, but this is true of regular work as well, because if you have to show up somewhere, your life is not under your control at that point. So now you're just arguing about the price.
Right.
And so if the money that you get from showing up allows you to live a decent life, then you're probably not a slave. If you have mobility to change to another job easily, skills, good education, good resume, whatever it is, you're probably not a slave. But there are many, many people who are valuable members of our society where neither of those conditions are true. And if you're familiar with Marx at all, you understand that there's constant built-in conflict between labor and capital. And the only reason anyone gets hired is because there's surplus value. And that means that the person who's hiring that person, if they pay you $10 an hour, they're making at least 15 or 20 off of your labor. Otherwise, no point in hiring you, right? You don't hire somebody to break even. And,
right.
So yes, wage slavery is inevitable under an unregulated capitalist system, because you've got a situation where the entire system is built around shareholder value, maximizing shareholder value. That was the whole Milton Friedman thing. And that's what, to my view, got us off on the whole wrong foot with the Reagan Revolution and the tax cuts and this idea, greed is good. All of these things were because we lost sight of the fact that capitalism isn't just for the investor class. It's also the way that almost everyone earns their living. And so if you're not thinking about the workers, if you're only thinking about the investor class, then yeah, it's wage slavery, period.
Yeah. I think that's right. And it seems like such a dramatic term, but like when you really break down what we're doing here, it is, when I think wage slavery, I think of a situation in which, right, if I stop working, I die, right? Like, and right now we live in a situation where if I stop working, there are some social safety nets that exist. I mean, they are tattered and they are not very good, but they do exist. I think that in terms of how do you cross out of wage slavery is like when, I mean, if we're up to me, and I think if we're up to you guys, everybody would just have a basic income, right? So you literally couldn't possibly fall through the cracks, right? And then anyone who works, and we're not talking about a basic income that is opulence, but we're talking about, subsistence, be able to like and live a halfway decent life, right? You have a house, you have food, and you have the basics, right? And I think that as soon as we live in a world where, certainly in the situation we live in now, where even having one job is a full-time job isn't enough, right? Like that is, I don't know how that's not slavery. I think about this, right? Like, and I've said this on previous shows, like the idea in law, like old law books, old law cases, like your employer was referred to as master. Right? Like master and servant. So it's like we are really living just a further down that gradation of that same relationship. And there's something about that for me that's really, really troubling, especially when we live in an environment where workers have increasingly less and less power to negotiate, power to do anything. And it is, again, I don't know how we get away from that term. And I think it points out the fundamental flaw in capitalism. And I think capitalism's great for what it's good for. But to the extent that it forces people to not see their family, right? To work two jobs and not be able to put food on the table when doing all that work, I don't know what else you call it. Drew, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're talking about here was captured in the Andrew Yang campaign, as well as Elizabeth Warren. I think both of them talked about this a lot, capitalism with guardrails as well as universal basic income, right? Like this is why I voted for Elizabeth Warren in the primary, because I thought that she nailed this issue really, really well. But, it's going to be even crazier as we move it towards automation. That's a thing that I think Andrew Yang was very on point about. If you think it's bad now with Amazon gobbling up businesses, wait till there's like driverless trucks. Truck driving is a huge percentage of unskilled labor in this country. And when that becomes obsolete, we're going to have a problem,
Yeah, that's for fucking sure, man.
And on the flip side of that coin, it's like we hear a lot on right-wing media and the Fox News and all that about the labor shortage and how no one wants to work because we give all these welfare programs during COVID and now nobody wants to work. Like this bullshit narrative. And really,
pisses me off so much.
It pisses me off so much. And it's not that there's a labor shortage; there's a wage shortage.
Yes,
right? Like that's the problem.
I do want to mention something about that, though, and that is going all the way back to the Black Death. Pandemics have increased the negotiating power of labor every single time.
Oh, that's interesting.
Wages have gone up after every pandemic, and ours is no exception. We are missing about 1 million people from America right now. Not a lot. Not all of those people were workers, of course. There's a lot of elderly people who died. There were a lot of people who weren't in the workforce who died, but just say it's a third, right? All of a sudden, now there are fewer people competing for every job than there would have been before. And there's more money flowing in the system than there was because of government assistance, right? So you've got a perfect storm for employers. But it turns out, actually, there were some states that had they had rescinded the extended unemployment from the federal government, and some of them got sued and were forced to keep paying it. But the ones that actually were successful in cutting it off are not seeing a decrease in their labor shortage. Of course,
go figure.
So what it comes down to is this is mostly about restaurants. And I think that there's been a sea change in the perception of people's willingness to work for poverty wages and being willing to go into a restaurant and It's hard work. Running a restaurant is hard work. You're on your feet all day. You are dealing with rude people. And I think that the rude people problem that has occurred in the air is also occurring in restaurants because, and this just goes back right into what you're saying, Christophe, about white rage. I mean, this is the entitled Karens on steroids. Okay. And people are just saying, hey, they took the pandemic. Maybe they learned to code. Maybe they learned something else because they took that time off where they were on government assistance and they learned new skills, or they just decided, I ain't fucking doing this anymore. And I think that's a lot of it.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
And, there's two things that came up as you were talking and that I've been thinking about also. And that is, that the cutting of the wages, right? Here's one of the uphill battles we face as progressives is that like the intuitive answer is oftentimes the wrong answer, but it's also but it can really be used for conservative ends. So for example, right, like you're driving down the street and you see a bunch of help wanted signs, and it's natural to think, oh, the government is giving people money, that's why people don't want to work. And that is like a natural flow to go toward, right? And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of it is like the sort of Protestant work ethic element here, right? This idea that like this, right? It's less about, it is about getting people back to work, but it's about being angry that people are not working, right? Like, and that is the same thing with how they deal with people, why they hate on the right, they hate welfare and they hate these programs, because this idea that there's someone somewhere getting away with something. I saw a meme that said like, right, that the Republican would rather let 10 people starve than allow one person to get something for free. Right. And it's like, and that is this mentality. And again, I think it ends up being deontologically sort of based. It's certainly not based on outcomes. And the other thing that I was thinking about too, and I wrote an essay about this a while back. And this is why this issue, I wanted to talk about this issue, I think, in the first place all around. And that is because during the pandemic, my wife and I spent a lot of time together, right? She was working from home. I work from home all the time, but she was working from home. And so, our relationship, and I think I love our marriage. I love my wife. I think we have a good relationship. I think, though, that during the pandemic, in some ways, we became more symbiotic, right? Because we lived and breathed each other. There was no one else to see. We didn't go anywhere. And it worked out really well. But it turned out as she started going back to work, I started realizing, like, she leaves the house and she doesn't get back. I mean, she leaves the house whatever time and she gets back, she cooks dinner, she maybe has an hour to herself at most, and then she's back in bed. And we barely talk to each other. We do when we see each other and we talk and we're doing the dishes together. But I mean, it's so much different than the experience of being with her all the time. And look, I don't think that I understand why people need to be back to the office, and I get that. But capitalism and the way that we run things, it throttles relationships, right? Like it has to, because it demands so much. And we live in a world where more and more and more of your time is demanded. 10-hour day is like a baseline, right? For my wife, right? So what I'm saying is that, like, not only do people then, our relationships are strained, they are attenuated. I mean, it's different. It's fine. We love each other and we're going to be fine. But it's like, holy shit, like, we only have so many years together on this planet. And I'm being robbed of those. I'm being, for no good reason. She could do her job from here, right? She could do her job from here. And I'll say one last thing before I shut up, and that is one of the things that I talked about in this essay. It's on radicalsecular.com if anybody wants to check it out, at the Journal. But is this idea that the folks that are running the world right now, people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s even, right, are people who grew up in an environment that was in person, that was right, where there was perhaps not even email or whatever. And so that in-person office culture is like sort of part of who they are. And it really pisses me off that they're like, all right, I want that back, right? That's meaningful to me. And so everybody else has to come back and do it because I need my little environment. That really pisses me off too. Yeah.
Well, one thing I want to say, and I don't want to do it now, but we need to do a deep dive into bullshit jobs, because that book by David Graeber is probably the best critique of capitalism and its relationship to labor. And it goes into all of this stuff about the Puritan work ethic. And it goes into all the petty jealousies and all of the rivalries and all that crap. And I think that it deserves us taking, a couple hours to go through the details on all of that. And we can also at the same time talk about, how we would design a basic income program that would still maintain incentives. But you wanted to say something, Drew.
Yeah, go for it, man.
No, I mean, I was just going to say that I completely agree with Christophe. I think, I'm a bit of an introvert, so working from home has been the one part of this whole thing that I've actually liked. I used to get up at the crack of dawn and get to the office at an ungodly hour just to be able to beat traffic coming and going, because I had a key to the building and they gave me the alarm code because they trust me. And, I just got there early and left early. And it was, tedious getting up that early, and, I'd just come home and nap, and then I could have some kind of normal afternoon, I guess. But I get that there are certain tasks that require people to physically be in their office. I get that. But I feel like the way things are technologically moving, those kind of interpersonal connections aren't as necessary as they were maybe 20 years ago.
No, and there's actually been some extensive scholarship on this that the longer your commute time, the more likely you are to get divorced.
Wow. That is telling as fuck, because just tag on, I tag on at least an hour on each end of my day. That's just commuting. That would be just commuting, right? And it'd be one thing if the commute were something that were pleasant, but it's not, right? It's hot because I live in the city, right? So public transportation, right? It's hot, it's cramped, and because the public transportation system is underinvested in, right? The entire country, right? So, and New York is no exception. I mean, New York is comically bad given the number of people that go in and out of the city. There are two train tunnels, right? The one that goes in and one that goes out for the entire Northeast corridor. That is from Washington, D.C. all the way up to New York. Every train that comes through there has to go through those two tunnels. It is insane that is the case. That is crazy because that is a lot of people and a lot of trains. But my point is that it's not like it's some lovely experience commuting. It is a stressful experience, and you're swearing and you get there, and now you have to do a whole day of work and perhaps deal with the various fiefdoms and all the all that nonsense. And then you come home and even if you have a great job, and I'm lucky I have a really great job. I think Drew, you have a great job too. You like your job, but still that commuting, like you say, it takes it out of you. It really does. You can be getting out of work on a Friday feeling good. You're like, yeah, man, fucking Friday. We had to hit the weekend. And then you get in that commute and you're just like, what happened to my enthusiasm? What happened to everything? I want to die.
Yeah. And you come home like a worn out dish rag.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on, I guess, to speaking of corporate power and corporations in general. And I want to talk now about the vaccine mandates. So let's turn our attention to this. It's been it's been causing a great deal of alarm among America's right wingers. But then again, everything causes a great deal of alarm by America's right wingers. Anything that's not fascism is oh my God, what's going on?
Or church.
Or church, right?
Yeah.
Church, or controlling women in any possible way. So let's talk about vaccine mandates. Axios, they like to say Axios, I heard, because I was listening to this on Crooked Media
really?
once. Yeah,
it's not Axios, huh?
Yeah, I thought it was Axios also. I mean, that's what it looks like. But then apparently the guy who runs Axios, he came on way back in the day. He came on Crooked Media and he said, nope, we say it like Axios. I was like, okay. That is not intuitive, but all right.
Is there a reference for that? I mean, did he say a reason?
I think there was something having to do with Greek something, sort of reference to classic reference like that. But I don't know. To me, it's just confusing. And I'm just going to say Axios. Fuck them. Axios. All right.
Fight the power, Christophe.
Fight the power. All right. Axios reports state governments, private businesses, and even part of the federal government are suddenly embracing mandatory coronavirus vaccines for their employees. This is significant because the vaccine mandates have been relatively uncommon in the United States. But with vaccine rates stagnating and the Delta variant driving yet another wave of cases, there's been a new groundswell of support for such requirements. Monday, this past Monday, was a turning point because the VA became the first federal agency to require its employees to be vaccinated. More than 50 medical groups, including the American Medical Association and the American Nurse Association, call for mandatory vaccinations of all healthcare workers. California announced that state employees and healthcare workers must show proof of vaccination or get tested regularly. New York City brought all municipal workers, including teachers and significantly police officers, because the vaccine rates are low among police officers, under a vaccine requirement that had previously only applied to health workers. Even the San Francisco Bar Owner Alliance hopped on board, announcing that the 500 San Francisco bars it represents will require indoor customers to show proof of vaccination or a negative test. Now, vaccine mandates have been unpopular in part because they inevitably create a backlash, but the vaccination efforts seem to have run out of carrots to incentivize more people to get the shot. And with rates remaining as low as they are in light of a worsening pandemic situation, resorting to sticks has clearly become a more attractive option, end quote. Drew, why are vaccine mandates so viscerally unpopular worldwide, and especially in the United States?
Well, I don't think that the United States has a monopoly on it, but I do think we're really good at it, unfortunately. And I trace it back to, these ideas of rugged individualism and what I call the freedom complex, where it's this "you're not the boss of me" attitude about anything, right? But I always say that freedom needs context to be a virtue, right? Like, not all freedom, quote unquote, is good. What about the freedom to pour toxic sludge into the waterway? What about the freedom to spread a deadly virus unchecked without, vaccination? There's a ripple effect with a lot of these courses of action. And I think it goes back to the American Revolution, really, just giving the Brits the finger. And I think that, giving authority figures the finger is not specifically American trait, but a popular one.
I think that's right.
And we now know that vaccines alone aren't enough to fight this, right? Because the variant is infecting people who are vaccinated. So we need to just keep up all of these practices. And, I wear glasses, so I get not liking to wear a mask. Like, my glasses fog up, It's not comfortable. It's not great. It's just kind of one of those, it is what it is things. And it's the same with the vaccine. It doesn't work unless we all do it. Like, I am personally much more in favor of these mandates than the average American. Just before taping, I saw that Disneyland and Walmart are both now requiring mandates for their vaccines for their employees. That's just a breaking story just right before we came on here. And I'm all for it. I say make it so these people can't get a job, can't get on a plane, can't get a driver's license, can't get a fucking library card without a vaccination. That is my feeling about it. I am tired of this bullshit.
100%, dude. 100%.
I am pissed, and I'm telling you, like, I'm going to take off my liberal hat for a minute and say, fuck these anti-vaxxers. Like, fuck them. They are not fit to be citizens. Okay. They are not part of the social contract, and they are killing people. And the fact of the matter is that we should have had a government mandate from the minute that Pfizer and Moderna and J&J, AstraZeneca, I don't fucking care, Sinovac, like, whatever, get a fucking jab, get it now. Like, every day that anybody waited beyond when it was available to them is a crime. I mean, they're committing a crime against their fellow citizens, against humanity. And, it's really, really telling when our government is so dysfunctional that our corporations are actually more liberal and more responsible than our government. Okay, it's fucking insane. Now, I was glad to see the military do it, of course, because that's something that Joe Biden can do with his signature. He's the commander in fucking chief. He can do that with a signature, and he can require every government employee. I love the fact that Biden's taken charge. Like when he first got up there, a day or two after his inauguration, he gave this Oval Office speech to all the federal government employees. And he said a couple of things that I thought were just great. He was like, if you're a problem in your office, if you mistreat anybody, if you speak badly to anybody, if you demean anyone, I'm going to fire your ass. Not exactly in those words, but he basically said that, and he put everybody on notice. And I think that is what a leader is supposed to do, is to put people on notice. And I don't know what the legalities are if he could sign an executive order and have a universal vaccine mandate for all Americans. I don't know if that would be legal. Christophe, maybe you want to weigh in on that. But that's what was called for. And every hesitation, I would be merciless. I'm talking about merciless. And I am so goddamn tired of these anti-vaxxers. They claiming that, oh, you're invading my body, you're raping me and all this kind of stuff. That is such horseshit. It's such snowflake horseshit, okay? And again, it's mostly men who, trivialize rape to begin with. Now you care?
Right.
Now you care? When it happened to you? It's like I was saying last week about it, when a guy who was a radio host got COVID and now he's changing his tune and telling people to get vaccinated, that you don't get any credit for that. Fuck no. You.
It's always rich when you hear right wingers say, "My body, my choice."
Yeah, like, are you fucking kidding me? Right, that is an astonishing thing. Right. Oh, this I saw a meme that's along these same lines, which is like, right. So my kid having to wear a bulletproof backpack to school and do drills. That's the price of freedom, right? Mm-hmm. That's the price of freedom, but. A jab in the arm. Oh my God. What could, right. So, and it's like, it is an astonishing thing to claim this sort of affinity for freedom. And in this absolute sense, right? This sort of deontological sense, right? This idea that like the absolute value of freedom matters. Like you were talking about this earlier, Drew, that matters more than the actual outcomes, right? People actually dying. Like my concept, and this again goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the show, this entitlement, right? This sense of I get to do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it, and no one gets to comment. In terms of the mandate, is that we mandate things on certain levels, right? We mandate for kids to go to school, public school, right? They have to get certain vaccinations for most of the part. I think that's going to be on a state level basis, though. So I find like I'm not claiming to have this figured out. I would have to think about it and look at it. But my guess is that Biden couldn't do that because of state police powers, quote unquote, are reserved explicitly for the states. So that's the problem with with voting. This is the problem with police forces, especially, right? That's why some police forces are like really top notch, professional, great. Then you have someone that are just like a bunch of guys with guns and a badge, right? Like there's a wide range for that very reason, and it's kind of scary.
It's one more reason for me to hate the Constitution. Okay, federalism. I don't agree with it. I mean, if you have a country that requires leadership, why the fuck do you have 50 different jurisdictions?
I know.
Are you trying to suggest that a bunch of slave-owning tax dodgers didn't come up with the most perfect government in the universe, Sean? Yeah. What?
What is this madness?
It's unbelievable how much people will defend that Constitution. And we had one today who, because of my article, came on and went, well, obviously you don't understand the rationale behind the Constitution. It was to balance federal and state power. It's like, yeah, that's the fucking problem. And you don't believe in democracy.
That's a really, really good point. And I'm reminded here of, so everyone out there, Sean and I are writing an intro to a book. Cora Annika Thiel, one of our guests, our friend, she is reissuing her memoir, and we were invited by her, and we're very grateful to be able to have that opportunity to write an intro. And one of the themes that we kept hitting on in that intro is the unearned, unjust hierarchy that is built into this country. When people walk around saying this country is racist, that's what they mean, right? Is that the from the very, very beginning, like, right, the Declaration of Independence calls Native people savages, right? Like, in the very first ever document, was a racist document, right? So I get why people bristle when people call America racist, but let's be honest, right? Let's be honest. And so what I want to keep sort of talking about here, though, is this structure that we are butting up against, and right, and people's defense of this, it reminds me of religious people, right? Because, religious people, they look at the Bible and I remember it because I used to be a religious person. So it's like you think back and think there used to be magic for some reason, right? Like the same rules that apply today didn't apply back then, right? And that's what I think, like, people think about the founding fathers as if they're these like magical characters, right? Like, and that's how we were brought up to think about them, right? Like, as if they're these mystical characters, and they weren't. They were brilliant. Especially in so many ways, but they were also, by the way, had Thomas Jefferson. We talked about this yesterday. The three of us, we talked about this earlier this week. Thomas Jefferson was absolutely brilliant, but also he had a child slave that he raped in the basement regularly. Okay, let's be honest, right? Let's be honest about that. Like that, right? Those two things are true. Not great.
True. I don't remember that part of Hamilton.
Well, you also probably don't remember the part about Moses being one of the founding fathers, which was in Texas textbooks, for fuck's sake.
That's just, this is what I'm talking about. I mean, what?
Yeah, you see images of, like, Jesus handing the Constitution to the founding fathers and stuff, these oil paintings and stuff in right-wing culture. It's ridiculous.
It really, really is ridiculous.
They can't even keep their myths straight.
Yeah, exactly. Like human beings riding on dinosaurs. That's another one of my favorite ones. Like, what? Look, what do you think happened? The
Flintstones, apparently.
And getting back to the vaccine mandate specifically, because this is not something that President Biden can do with his pen and an executive order or something like that, it's really important, right, that corporations are stepping up. I mean, like, it is, again, like the system, it sucks that corporations have this much power, but they do. And so since they do, we ought to leverage that power. And so it is, I see this as a really positive step that, like you said earlier, Sean, that in some ways corporations have taken the lead in being progressive, because to survive, they actually need to reflect their customers, right? The government doesn't have to do that anymore, thanks to gerrymandering and in a world in which minority rule, they're not responsive to their voters, right? Like the GOP does not look like America at all, right? So anyway, I just wanted to hit on that, and in a similar vein, Sean, do you think that it's fair? So we've been critical here at the Radical Secular of corporate power, obviously. So how would you respond, Sean, to someone who would point out that potential private sector vaccine mandates would be better than the government? They would say, see, the private sector is better at public health than the government. How do you respond to that?
I'd say that person is a fucking fascist.
That's perfect.
What is the definition of fascism? It is the merger of corporation and state, right?
Right.
And that is exactly what we don't want to have happen. I mean, it is not the role. Okay, let's take a step back, though, a bit from the question and say, okay, why does anyone ever trust anyone? And the answer to that question is shared interests. Okay. And so at this point, there is more shared interest between corporations and consumers than there is at this moment between government and citizens. And that's the reality, is that our government has been so hijacked by the fascists, let's not even make any bones about it. Okay. The Republican Party, they're fascists and they're Confederates, and they have ruined our government to the point where we are falling behind other nations and we're in danger of collapsing as a country. So this is the reality
and
here.
as a climate.
And the climate. Let's not even talking about that, but public health is the responsibility of government. It is in the Declaration of Independence. It is in the Constitution. Provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. Okay, that includes everything really. It includes everything up until basic income, healthcare. But it definitely includes when there is an emergency. A public health emergency, the ability to take unquestioned control of the situation. I'm talking about there should have been contact tracing from the very beginning, from the get-go, from November of 2019, January 2020, when we first had any inkling about this. I mean, the apps should have been rolled out to our telephones for near field contact sensing of anybody who had a positive testing status. I mean, we could have done so much with this, and I just assumed naively last year that certainly within a few months we'll have those apps on our phones and we'll all be checking in with our status, and we all will want to be notified if we were exposed and these kind of things like that. And boy, was I wrong. I mean, these people are acting as if it's a home invasion. I mean, you had these right-wing talk show hosts talking about, the idea that there were goons coming to their doors to vaccinate them. It's like, I don't. This is un-American. This is, and here's the point. Okay. These guys have such a warped concept of what implies heroism versus what implies cowardice. Okay. And there's all of these yahoos who are like, oh, I'd take a bullet for my country. It's like, no, dipshit, you won't even take a vaccine for your country, let alone a bullet, right? Yeah. They are so scared and so, they're cowards. That's the point. They have made cowardice into heroism, and heroism into cowardice. It's completely back-ass words. And I could just go on about this, but I won't because I let somebody else talk now.
Yeah, I agree with everything Sean was saying. As far as, the private sector versus government, I think we need both. I think we need to utilize every tool at our disposal to fight this virus. I don't think it's an either or thing or a matter of trying to score points in the scoreboard. There's going to be areas where the private sector needs to step up, and there's areas where the government needs to step up. We all need to step up, or else this is just going to go on forever. We're just going to Delta, whatever the next mutation is of this damn thing. Who knows what? So we need to get our hands around this thing somehow.
Yeah, and that's really scary, guys, because, the Delta variant, right? This is just one variant, but it's already we're already at a mutation stage where the virus can be transmitted by people who are vaccinated, right? And you may not get symptoms, you might get mild symptoms, but you can pass it on. So how long is it before it mutates, right? How many more variants will it take for it to mutate to a place where vaccines are only 75% effective, right? Or 80% or 65% effective, right? Like that is, I think, I'm not a virologist, but I think that's kind of how viruses work. They mutate and they try to find ways to survive. So that is a really scary prospect. And it makes it so critical that we nip this in the bud now. And I agree with both of you. I agree with you, Sean, right? That ideally we live in a system where the government, like more of a South Korea type environment, where South Korea, they were just on this, right? And they were able to do the contact tracing. They had systems. They had, and everyone had PPE. They had what they need. Ideally, that's where we would be, something like that. But in the world that we live in now, which is where corporations have far, far too much power, like it is. I am really, really happy. I agree with you guys. I'm glad that you can force people without forcing people, right? Because you can say like, look, you don't have to work, but you love capitalism, right? You love capitalism. You think work or die. Well, look, This is what happens. If you want to work, you get a vaccine. You were talking about earlier, Sean, free fucking market, bro, right?
Yeah.
You love the fucking free market, right? Hey, man, these private organizations are deciding on their own to require vaccine mandates. All of a sudden, you don't like the private sector, right? All of a sudden, you don't like markets. Come on. So I am very heartened to see this. I'm happy. I'm also happy, though, that the Biden administration, wasn't heavy-handed about this, right? The evidence is in front of everyone's faces, right? Especially if you live in a red state right now. People are going to hospitals, people are dying, like people are getting sick, right? So the evidence is in front of us. I think that I'm glad that Biden sort of showed some restraint, and now he can really just be like, look, federal government, everyone has to get fucking vaccinated or show, and that is a lot of people. That is a huge start. And also federal contractors. Right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
It's a lot. And I want to say I agree with both you guys that we do need a government corporate partnership here. When I said fascist and when I'm talking about marriage of corporation and state, what I mean is the corporations were in lieu of the state because the state wasn't doing anything. And the way I would see it ideally working out is the government would design or contract out the design of this app or whatever it is that would be like a vaccine passport, and then corporations could utilize that, and there could be a central database, right? And these are things. The idea of a vaccine passport and a central database drives right wingers batshit.
Oh my god, they lose it.
So this is the thing, though, is that what would be so wrong with having like a national records keeping system? And so when you go to the door with your cell phone, you're scanned in, with your little government QR code that says you got vaccinated. Simple, easy peasy, makes life better for everyone.
Right. Oh, by the way, these are the same people who were like, oh, you should have a ID requirement for voting.
Oh yeah.
Right. The same people. These are the same people. Well, these are the same people. Right. That these undocumented workers. Like it's
you should have complied crowd.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The you should have complied crowd. It is astonishing. We talk about this bad faith all the time, and we shouldn't. It's not surprising, but it still is like this has nothing to do with what's right, what's wrong, what's any kind of principle other than the desire to dominate. Like, and just be able, again, that I should be on top of the world and be able to do whatever I want. And if I'm not that, I'm going to throw a temper tantrum.
I'm right, you're wrong. And it's like, it comes down to also when you're picking, it's this idea of getting rid of the neutral referee for facts. And once you get rid of that neutral referee for facts, they will line up all their alternative facts over here and say, you have to look at these, and they'll dismiss all of the actual facts over here. And it's just now you're just going, I'm right, you're wrong. And they're going, you're right, I'm wrong. So it's
exactly.
Like, or vice versa, insane. And the double standards are across the board in every area you look at, whether it's cancel culture, whether it's the insurrection, whether it's vaccines, whether it's masks, double standards out the yin yang.
Yeah. Right. And that neutral referee thing that's an important point, right? Because that is the goal of government, like that is the role of government, like in life, right? Is basically to be like the superstructure that everything else happens inside of. And right, the goal, if you are on the right, is to eliminate that. So basically there is, like you say, no neutral referee, nobody who can say you're right and you're wrong. And then you end up in this sort of situation like something out of The Expanse, right? Where corporations are so powerful, right? That they are, sure, the UNN, the United Nations, stuff like that is the government, and Christian in the earlier seasons sort of draws that line very, very sharply. But it's almost dystopic in that show in its discussion of the role of corporations, where you can tell out there in space, like everyone identifies with the company they work for.
Right.
That's how they identify. Sure, they're also Earthers and Martians and stuff like that. But really, it's that jumper that they wear, Tycho or whatever the hell it says on their thing, right? Like that's really what it is, and that is a terrifying. That's that fascism you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, well, and it's also governments. I mean, the UNN was weak. I mean, the Martian government was in a lot of ways, really equivalent or maybe even stronger than Earth's government. It's just and so that that show is such a great example of how our politics could evolve if we don't strengthen government.
Definitely. Drew, did you want to add something?
I mean, not really. That show was great. It's been a little while since I've watched it. I'll have to go back and revisit it.
Yeah,
you should.
I'm working through it now, and it's one of those shows that I really don't want to be doing anything else when I'm watching it, because it's just so engaging and it's so visually like powerful the way that show is, and also the quick little like their quick little go back and forth is very witty sometimes, so you want to make sure you catch it all. But yeah, it really, really is excellent. Well, maybe we'll have to pick out some themes there at some point to do a show on as well. Well, look, guys, we are pretty much at the end of our time, believe it or not. Do either of you have any final thoughts? Anything you want to add?
Get vaccinated.
Please, everybody go get vaccinated.
Yeah, I have one thing I did want to bring up. I got this record in the mail the other day. This is Propaganda's Less Talk, More Rock album.
Nice.
Put in the frame here. Now, this is a really great record. This album changed my life. Now, you can see on the cover there, it's for the audio listeners, the cover art is a steer trampling the farmer, presumably that is his rancher. And the text across the border says, animal friendly, anti-fascist, gay positive, pro-feminist.
Yeah,
this is the 25th anniversary pressing of this album. It was hugely influential to my life and the way I see the world. And there is one line in a song on that record. The song is called "The Only Good Fascist is a Very Dead Fascist." and there's a section in the song where he says, "What exactly are the great historical accomplishments of your race that make you proud to be white? Capitalism, slavery, genocide, sitcoms. This is your fucking white history, my friend. So why not start making history worth being proud of and start fighting the real fucking enemy?"
Wow. That's powerful.
Men.
Yeah. So that came in the mail the other day. And, I was thinking about the themes of the show, and it's the 25th anniversary of that album. Propaganda's Less Talk, More Rock. People should check it out. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Propaganda is fucking awesome. We're going to do some music shows too in the future. All right, guys, it's been a really great conversation. We're at the end of our time. And everyone out there, please remember that if you like our show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, check out our Patreon, and tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels. We also publish new articles weekly in our journal at theradicalsecular.com. I'm Christophe Defoe. Thank you for being here. And remember that wherever you are, you can be radically secular.
The Radical Secular Podcast is written and produced by Christophe Defoe, Sean Prophet, and Joe Okipinti. Logo and main title designed by Tim Stetner. Post-production and original theme music by Sean Prophet. Special thanks to our support team, Lindsay Brightman, Jillian Sky Jacobs, and Lori Field Okipinti.